very happy to be here today and be supporting this project. To raise some money to help restore the tower. I can't think of a more wonderful project. This is going to be a bit of a personal talk this morning. I'm a Jungian analyst and I'm also a Melville scholar. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Moby Dick, so I'm implicated in this way on all sorts of levels. These are some a timeline of important dates. Melville's born in 1819. Moby Dick is published in 1851. That means that Herman wrote Moby Dick when he was what age?
32.
Well, it was published in 32, but he probably wrote it at 31. If we move down here to 1924, the voyage of the Murrays and Morgans to England, that's when Murray reads Moby Dick, and he's 31 years old. So you've got the difference between the man who writes Moby Dick at 31 and the man who reads Moby Dick at 31. 56, 5 years after Moby Dick, Sigmund Freud is born. Carl Jung is born in 1875. Murray is born in 1893 and Christiana in 1897. They are modern people. 1900, or really in 1899, you get the publication of the Interpretation of Dreams. In 1904 to 1907, at the Berg-Holtzley Hospital, you got the invention of the word association test by Carl Jung. That's one of the first projective tests. It's a verbal projective test. It's not a visual projective test. We move on down here to the thematic apperception test in 34-35. That's one of the primary visual projective tests. 1909, Freud and Jung come to America. Jung says that Freud said to him they're bringing the plague to America, but the Americans don't know it yet. 1913, the first interpretation in English published in America of the Interpretation of Dreams by A.A. Brill, the founder of New York Psychoanalytic Society. 1921, 1924 is the so-called Melville revival. Nobody knew about or cared about Melville or Moby Dick, particularly up until that time. And you get the first biography of Melville, and then you get the publication of Billy Budd, posthumously. Melville dies in 1891. You have the voyage of the Murrays and Morgans together to England in 1924. In 1930-34, Jung's Vision Seminar on Morgan's Action Imaginations, and in 34-35, the invention of the thematic apperception test. 67, the death of Christiana Morgan. In 1989, the death of Henry A. Murray. I first learned about psychoanalysis, and it became the passion of my life, in the fall of 1968. I had just returned from a summer in Washington, D.C. when I had been a reporter intern on the Washington Post. I returned to Fort Worth, Texas, where I was an undergraduate at TCU. And my girlfriend at the time was a little bit younger than me, but a year ahead of me at the university. She was a senior, and she was writing her senior honors thesis on Freud and scientific method, trying to demonstrate that Freud's method was actually scientific. And I was reading Herbert Marcuse and Norman O. Brown, and they were talking about psychoanalysis and the importance of an end to repression. And as a 21-year-old boy, the end of repression sounded like a very good thing in 1968. My girlfriend, though, told me that they were using repression in a non-technical way, and that if I wanted to have anything to do with her, I would have to go over to the library and check out the standard edition of the complete psychological works of Sigmund Freud and get up to speed on the technical terminology, which I promptly did. And then I fell in love with Freud. So that was 1968. 1970, I went to the University of Texas as a graduate student. I had gone down in 1969 and to work in the Texas legislature for one semester and to write for the Texas Observer. And at that time, I'd taken a course at the University of Texas, an undergraduate course, and I'd had a professor who was an intellectual and cultural historian, and I thought he was the best professor I'd ever seen. So I was quite happy to go back down to Austin as a graduate student in the next year in 1970. This man was my graduate advisor, it turned out, and he was teaching a course that term when I arrived there called Freud in America. This I thought was the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me. This was about these very precise years from about 1900 to about 1924 when psychoanalysis came into America, especially down here in Greenwich Village. And so I was thrilled by this. He said, "What else do you want to take this term?" I said, "I want to take William Faulkner. I love Faulkner. I'd like to read all of his novels. I want to take William Faulkner." He said, "Don't take that course. That professor's a turd," he said so eloquently. And I said, "Okay, what should I take?" He said, "Take Herman Melville." I had never read any Melville, and I knew his reputation and all that. But I started taking that course, and one of the first things I read in that course was Henry A. Murray's. I can't quite call him Harry. That seems a little bit too informal for me. I know we're supposed to call him Ishmael, but I can't call him Harry. 1921, the great song was famous, the pop song, "I'm Just Wild About Harry." So I guess, everybody had to call Henry A. Harry, but I have to call him Henry A. Murray. And I read his famous essay, "In Nomine Diaboli." This is the curse that Captain Ahab levels against the white whale. Not in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, but my pursuit of the white whale is in the name of the devil. So this is a famous psychoanalytic essay by Murray, and suddenly I had these two courses in parallel, Herman Melville and Freud in America, and they just were a perfect fit. There was cross-reading in each one. I was reading Freudian theory and Jungian theory and Adlerian theory and all this, and then also this other thing. So that's how I became interested in Henry A. Murray in the first place. I never met Christiana Morgan because she died in 1967, and of course I didn't even become knowledgeable at all about psychoanalysis until 1968. I did, however, meet Harry Murray once here in New York. It would have been about 1980. I was teaching American literature at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, and I came up here for the Modern Language Association convention in December, late December, early January, and I was a member of the Melville Society. I'm wearing my little white whale lapel pin today. Those men wore white whale tie tacks and everything, and I joked when I came back that they were going to outdo everybody. That somebody would come in there with an ivory leg at some point. They were so fanatical about Melville. We had the Melville Society meeting at the New York Public Library, which owns the only existing manuscript of one of Melville's novels, his first novel, Type P, and it was under glass there for us all to look at. And I was there in the room with all these mainly men who were Melville fanatics, and guess who was there? Well, Harry Murray was there. And there he was, this Boston Brahmin, a representative of the old New England Boston elite. He had his tweeds on and all this sort of thing. And I went up and introduced myself to him and said how much I appreciated his work. So that's a little personal account there. This is Henry A. Murray about the time that I believe this is about what he looked like at the time that I met him here in New York that day. This is me on my first whaling voyage at the age of 4 or 5 in the front yard of my grandmother's house in Texas with my cousin Sally. A week later, sitting astride my inflatable black whale, I harpooned it with a screwdriver right in the head while I was sitting on it. You can imagine the trauma I've been living through the rest of my life. And of course, that's why I ended up writing a dissertation on Moby Dick. I guess I'm the only person in the room who, after his wedding, drove his wife up to Pittsfield, Massachusetts to spend a honeymoon going to Melville's homestead at Arrowhead here. I thought that was a wonderful thing I was doing for her. This is the room. This is the room in which Melville wrote Moby Dick. This is not what it looked like at the time. This is all period furniture, but other people have owned the house in the meantime and done various things to it. But this is the room where Melville sat when he wrote Moby Dick. This is the room downstairs. You kind of like sit there around the fireplace. It's got one thing that is from that time, and that's the iron plates around the fireplace there. You can't see it, but his brother, Alan Melville, who dearly loved Herman, etched in acid in this metal plate around the fireplace the first words to Melville's short story, "I and My Chimney." So that's a lovely little thing about the place. Now this is the Berkshire Athenaeum in Pittsfield, and as you can see, this was a gift to Henry A. Murray. He, being a philanthropist too, and he donated things. This is one of the portraits of Melville's mother, and this is another one. Harry owned those two portraits, and he donated them to this room there. There are all sorts of Melville memorabilia, scrimshaw, all sorts of things there on display. This is, as it was described when I was studying all this is the coquettish Maria Melville, Maria Gonsworth Melville, and this is the matronly Maria Gonsworth Melville over there at two different times of her life. But you can see all of the sort of things that Harry collected and put on display at the Athenaeum. Well, this is my nail. It's not from the True Cross, but it's from Melville's barn, where Melville and Hawthorne used to drink champagne and smoke cigars, if you can imagine it, up in the hayloft while they talked what they called ontological heroics. So this is one of my little souvenirs. Here's the portrait of Herman Melville from the Houghton Library. It's a magnificent, beautiful portrait. This is the title page from the 1851 edition of Moby Dick. And there's Mr. Young's estimation of Melville's novel, the greatest American novel. This is the Rockwell Kent picture of the white whale. Now we're going to get into funny business and the thematic apperception test. I'm not going to be talking about the vision seminars. I'm not going to be talking only about Christiana Morgan. I'm not going to be talking about the tower on the Marsh. I'm going to be talking about an additional dimension of Christiana's life, a very important one, it seems to me, and a very important intellectual dimension of her life, for which sometimes she took credit and sometimes she didn't get credit. This is the thematic apperception test that we're moving toward. So Murray had an absolute lifelong passion for Melville and Moby Dick. His great despair and failure in his life was not finishing what he thought he was going to do, which was write the great, big, first, giant biography of Melville. And he is one of these men, it could be a woman too, but one of those persons who becomes, passionately appreciative of somebody who is a great person, and then wants to do something in relation to that person, and wants to write a book about that person, but somehow just cannot finish the thing. So it never happened. It never got done. And this was one of the great sorrows and tragedies, I guess you could call it, of Murray's life. Well, chapter 99, the doubloon, Moby Dick. This is the talisman of the white whale. Captain Ahab gets everybody drunk. He nails a $16, it's worth $16, gold doubloon to the mainmast, and says anybody, the first man to sight the white whale gets the doubloon. Now, they make a whole lot more money killing black whales and boiling them down to oil and taking them back to Nantucket, so it's really not, there's no economic sense to, we're pursuing this one white whale to all of our decent economic disadvantage. You get an interesting question about motivation here. This is an actual gold coin from Ecuador. Melville didn't make up the gold coin there. This is the actual backside of the coin. This is how it's described in the novel. On its round border, it bore the letters Republico del Ecuador, and there we have it. Quito, which was the capital of Ecuador. Zoned by those letters, you saw the likeness of three Andes summits. There they are, three mountains. From one, a flame, there it is. I guess. On a tower on another, there would be the tower, and here's the crowing cock, a rooster. While arching over all is a segment of the partitioned zodiac, there we got it right there, with the keystone sun entering the equinoctial point at Libra. So he's literally describing a particular coin. Now, what do you make of this coin? All of these sailors come and circumambulate the coin, and various people observe this, and this is Captain Ahab. This shows you Ahab's personality. Just think of the thematic apperception test, and you flip the gold doubloon to Captain Ahab, and this is his projection onto it. The subject, the firm tower, that is Ahab. The volcano, that is Ahab. The courageous, the undaunted, and victorious fowl, that too is Ahab. All are Ahab. And this round globe is but the image of the rounder globe, which, like a magician's glass, to each and every man in turn, but mirrors back his own mysterious self. I don't know whether you could get any better and more beautiful definition of what a projective test is. But we all look at the same thing, but we all have a subjective kind of projection onto that object. Flask, one of the mates, is observing all of these sailors go up, with all coming up with different ideas about what the gold doubloon means, and he says, there's another rendering now, but still one text. There's just one thing here, but an incredible multiplicity and infinity of subjective projections that people impose on the object. All sorts of men in one kind of world you see. Now that's why I think Herman Melville is really the greatest psychoanalyst of all time, much better than Sigmund Freud and much better than Carl Jung, et cetera, et cetera. This is Christiana Morgan. This is in 1935. She's got her little cigarette there, and she's standing right outside the tower. She would have been what age there? 38? Let's say there she is in 1935. 1935 is the year that Morgans and Murray, she was listed as the first author of this article. They're a method for investigating fantasies. The thematic apperception test was published. So this is exactly the way she looked at the time that the thematic apperception test was first published. And she was the first author. Now by the time you get around to the thematic apperception test published by Harvard University, at some point by 1941, or shortly thereafter, suddenly Christiana's name is not credited anymore. It's Henry A. Murray and Associates, something like that. That's the way it's listed. Now there's some dispute about how this happened and why. Murray said she wanted her name taken off, and he also said that he only put her name on there as the first author to, I don't know, encourage her. I'm not quite very happy with that particular explanation. Somehow that seems dubious to me. But this is what it looked like, and she had, my question here is where does the idea for the thematic apperception test or any one of these visual projective tests come from? One idea, which I know is an idea that's out there in the literature, is that Murray read chapter 99 of Moby Dick and got the idea for projective tests from that he took it from Melville. But there's another story which seems to be also true, that in a class in about 1934, that the TAT arose from a question raised by a student in one of Murray's undergraduate classes at Harvard. The class had been discussing Jung's idea of active imagination. This comes from Clara Douglas's book, Translate This Darkness. Cecilia Roberts was her name, this girl in Henry's undergraduate class. She reported that her son, when ill, one day greeted his mother when she came home from work with stories he had made up about the pictures in the magazine she had left for him. She wondered if pictures couldn't similarly release fantasy material in a clinical setting. So this undergrad, then Murray gets all excited about this, runs off with Christiana, and then they begin to think about, what this test might be. Now these, in order, there's 6 slides here. These are the 6 slides that are definitively attributed to Christiana Morgan. She drew these. One of them is a variation on another image by a famous artist, but the other 5, I guess, she drew from scratch. So now this is card number 1. This is another of the ones that she's supposed to have drawn. No. In fact, I'm going to read you what it says in the Thematic Apperception Test manual. This is to now think about this as whether this is just a completely flat, literal description of the picture, or whether there's some subjective projection going on here in these descriptions. That's a very interesting little question. Can you ever purge projection from your actual factual description? A young boy is contemplating a violin which rests on a table in front of him. On the floor against a couch is the huddled form of a boy, pardon me, is that right? Yeah. Of a boy with his head bowed on his right arm. Beside him on the floor is a revolver. Get the revolver down here. A short elderly woman stands with her back turned to a tall young man. It looks like Perry Mason to me, actually. Raymond Burr. Turned to a tall young man. The latter is looking downward with a perplexed expression. The portrait of a young woman, a weird old woman with a shawl over her head, is grimacing in the background. The silhouette of a man or woman against a bright window. The rest of the picture is totally black. These are all descriptions from the manual of the Thematic Apperception Test. A man is clutched from behind by 3 hands. 1, 2, 3. The figures of his antagonists are invisible. Now, why would they be antagonists? That's an interesting question. Yeah. Maybe it's a three-handed monster hugging him lovingly. I want to go back to number 1. Now, when I look at this, one thing that occurs to me is this is the Stradivarius of Yehudi Menuhin, the young Yehudi Menuhin, who was the brother of Yalta Menuhin, a concert pianist, who was a future wife of the Jungian analyst and sandplay therapist Joel Rice Menuhin. Another thing that occurs to me on other occasions when I look at this is that this is the gypsy jazz violin of the young Stéphane Grappelli of the Hot Club of France. Imagining playing at Ronnie Scott's club in London at some future point. But my favorite one, of course, being a transplanted Texan, is that this is the Western swing fiddle of Bob Wills of the Texas Playboys as a young man in Turkey, Texas. Okay, now those are just 3 possible projections one might make on this card. Now this is in my Thematic Apperception Test, which I have back there in my briefcase, I found a couple of pages of notes I'd taken from years ago. I don't know exactly when. One is what a young boy had to say about the first card, and I'll read that to you. It will give you some kind of impression of the differences here. This young boy said, "This boy is looking at the violin because he's been playing it but can't figure out how to make any songs." He's sitting there stumped. He can't figure out how to make any songs. His mother gave the violin to him because she loves the instrument. The boy is worried about what his mom will say. He doesn't want her to be angry at him because he can't learn. While playing, he broke the violin. Not only can he not play, but he broke the instrument. He's extremely sad because his mother will be angry. Now, what would you make of that personality of that boy? You can see what kind of data you might get from applying the test. Now, this is a woman. Okay. This little boy has stolen this violin from his neighbor who is a black kid whose parents worked days and nights to buy this violin and give him lessons. The boy had stolen it just as a prank. Now, Guess what? It's broken. He's trying to think how to mend it. He's mortified, terrified. The consequences are awful because the black kid's parents invested so much. The boy's thinking of running away because he can't face the awful reactions of the black kid's parents. He decides to hide the broken violin. Then he feels so guilty. When the black kid's parents go crazy looking for the violin, the boy becomes sick. He gets put in the hospital. He's so sick, he's at death's door. His black friend visits him in the hospital and tells him that his uncle from Jamaica brought him an old violin that was in the family and that it's a much better instrument. But the little boy is so sick he dies. That's all I have to say. I hope that gave you a little bit of a sense of Christiana Morgan and the diversity of her life and her interest in pictures and her interest in the relationship between psychology and projection and art. Thank you very much.